Imagine dedicating your entire life, draining your bank account, and just pushing your mental health to the absolute brink to get through medical school.
Oh yeah, the pressure is already immense, even before you take a single exam.
Right. You are studying night and day, memorizing every single pathway of the human body.
Hmm.
But now, imagine getting to exam day, sitting down at that desk, and realizing the test you are taking is mathematically rigged so that half of your class will automatically fail.
I mean, that completely shatters the illusion of meritocracy, right?
Yeah,
You walk in there believing that hard work and knowledge will guarantee your success.
exactly.
And instead, you just find yourself trapped in this administrative labyrinth.
And that labyrinth is exactly what we're navigating today. So, welcome to our deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack a profoundly provocative manifesto published in Bye magazine.
Yeah, authored by Dr. Melvin Sewell.
Right, and he writes this within the broader context of the Echo Rift archive and Cosmic University. What he has presented here is just a searing, unvarnished indictment of the systemic issues within higher education.
It really is.
The journey he takes us on starts in the high-stakes environment of Caribbean medical schools, and then it scales all the way up to the elite, Ivy-covered institutions on the U.S. mainland.
And, you know, the author is highly intentional about how he frames this piece. He explicitly calls his writing a diagnostic tool and a cinematic indictment of systemic erosion in academia.
A cinematic indictment, that's a heavy phrase.
Yeah, he isn't just complaining about bad grades here. He is asking us to look at the structural hidden mechanics of how we actually train doctors and scientists.
Which is fascinating.
Right. He's alleging that these foundational systems are fundamentally rigged to filter for conformity rather than capability.
Okay, but before we dive into the actual mechanics of how this alleged rigging works, we need to pause and issue a really crucial disclaimer to you, our listener.
Yes, very important.
The source material we are unpacking today contains highly charged, explosive allegations. We are discussing claims of systemic bias, institutional grift, ties to eugenics, and deep-seated discrimination.
So we must make it unequivocally clear we're not taking sides here.
No, not at all.
We are not endorsing the author's viewpoints, nor are we independently validating these very intense claims. Our role here today is to act purely as impartial analysts.
Exactly. We are just exploring these fascinating and heavy allegations exactly as they are laid out in the original source material.
Our goal is to understand the author's perspective, the mechanisms he describes, and the broader arguments he is constructing about our educational infrastructure.
So let's start at the ground level, which means looking at the literal mechanics of testing. According to the text, in 2015, the author enrolled at Ross University School of Medicine.
Right.
He went in expecting rigorous, incredibly difficult medical training, but what he claims he found instead was a really sophisticated system of test manipulation.
Yeah, he calls it the doctrine of the most correct answer.
The most correct answer.
Which is the engine of this entire critique. This isn't about giving students trick questions or, testing them on obscure material.
Right.
It is about the fundamental psychological structure of a multiple-choice question. The author alleges that roughly 30% of the questions on these high-stakes exams featured multiple answers that were factually and scientifically correct.
Oh, wait, 30% had more than one right answer.
Yeah, mathematically and scientifically correct. But the grading system would only grant credit for the one specific answer the institution deemed to be the most correct.
Wow. I mean, this completely upends the way you and I usually think about science. The source actually gives a very specific, perfectly illustrative example of this.
The enzyme question.
Right. The multiple choice test asks which enzyme breaks down starch, and the options provided on the screen include both amylase and delin.
And if we look at that from a strictly biological standpoint, both of those options are completely accurate. Amylase is the broad class of enzyme that digests starch. Kyelin is the specific historical name for salivary amylase. So if a student selects Tylen, they are demonstrating a highly specific, nuanced level of medical knowledge.
But according to the author's account, if a student selected Tylen, they received absolute 0 credit for the question.
0 credit. Just wrong.
Right. Only amylase was flagged by the system's algorithm as the most correct answer. So even though Tylen is a scientifically valid, maybe even more precise response, the student is actively punished for choosing it.
Which is incredibly frustrating.
I was trying to think of an analogy for this, and it feels exactly like a rigged carnival game. You know, the one where you have to toss the plastic ring over the glass bottle to win a prize?
Oh yeah, those are the worst.
You threw it perfectly, Your trajectory and aim are dead on, but the ring bounces off because the game operator secretly swapped out the bottle for one that's a millimeter wider than the ring. You didn't lose because you lacked skill or knowledge. You lost because the parameters of success were hidden from you and entirely controlled by the house.
And the consequence of that hidden mechanism is a total shift in the student's cognitive process. It shifts the entire goal of the exam.
How so?
Well, you are no longer trying to demonstrate your objective medical competency. You're engaged in a psychological guessing game.
Right, you're playing the professor, not the material.
Exactly. You are trying to mind-read the test maker's arbitrary preference. Can you guess what the authority figure wants you to say? It turns a test of knowledge into a test of institutional conformity.
Okay, but here is where I have to push back on the author's premise a bit.
Sure.
If I look at this logically, the ultimate goal of a medical school is to produce doctors, right? They want a high graduation rate that they can boast about on glossy brochures to future applicants.
That's the normal assumption, yeah.
So what possible incentive does the institution have to artificially lower their student scores this way? Like, why build a carnival game where nobody wins?
Well, if you look at the business model of offshore medical schools as outlined in the text, you see why the institution actually benefit from this exact scenario.
Really?
Yeah, to answer your question, the failure isn't a glitch in the system. According to the source, the failure is the financial architecture of the school.
Oh, wow.
We have to look at how these institutions are actually funded.
So the students here are just trying to become doctors, the ones taking these most correct exams. What are they in this model?
They are raw materials in an attrition strategy. The author points to a deeply alarming statistic. Half of the incoming students at Ross University failed out.
Half. A 50% attrition rate.
50%. In a traditional educational environment, a 50% failure rate would trigger a massive internal audit.
Oh, absolutely. It would be seen as a catastrophic breakdown of the admissions department for letting unprepared students in, or just a total failure of the teaching faculty.
Exactly. But the text alleges that this was a deliberate, mathematically engineered strategy.
So the claim is that they admit these massive oversized classes, way more students than they could ever actually train in a hospital setting.
Yeah.
They get the students in the door, they secure their upfront tuition money, and critically, they lock in their federal student loan money.
That's the key part.
And once that federal capital is transferred to the school's accounts, the institution systematically discards half the class using that manipulative testing doctrine we just talked about.
Yeah, and the source material provides a very clear timeline to demonstrate just how entrenched this alleged system was and how it operated over a full decade.
A decade.
The chronology here is vital to understanding the scale of the critique.
Yeah.
So in 2010, the text notes there were widespread reports of severe overcrowding at the school, along with heavily delayed clinical placements for the students who actually did manage to pass their initial exams.
Which makes perfect logistical sense if you think about it. If you admit 1,000 students, but you only have hospital partnerships to place 300 of them for their clinical rotations, you have to cull the herd before they reach the hospital floor.
Right.
You literally do not have the physical infrastructure to let them all succeed.
Exactly. Moving forward to 2015, which is when the author enrolled, the high attrition rates, that 50% failout rate, were being heavily documented and debated.
Wow, okay.
2 years later, in 2017, the parent company of the school, Adtalem, faced formal investigations into deceptive practices.
And this entire timeline culminates in 2020, with former students actually filing borrower defense claims.
Right.
They were basically pleading with the United States government for loan forgiveness because they felt they had been financially defrauded by the institution's practices.
So looking at that 10-year span, from 2010 to 2020, you see a persistent pattern of institutional behavior.
Yeah, it's undeniable.
The author claims this behavior was entirely centered on profit extraction rather than genuine medical education. The school acts as a toll booth, collecting federal funds while filtering out half the participants before they can ever demand the expensive clinical training they paid for.
You know, for you listening right now, I think the most jarring detail in all of this isn't just that a school might operate a ruthless financial model.
What is it?
It's the sheer complicity of the system. Despite a decade of lawsuits, federal investigations, and mounting complaints about overcrowding and rigged exams, the school continued to receive federal student aid.
Yeah.
Your taxpayer dollars. Taxpayer money was flowing directly into an institution to sustain what the author describes as an engineered, deliberate machine of attrition.
It is a profound structural critique. The author is suggesting that the government is essentially subsidizing the failure of its own citizens.
Exactly.
But Dr. Sewell doesn't stop at the financial critique. The manifesto takes a turn here, claiming the rabbit hole goes much deeper than just money.
Yeah, this is where the text shifts from a story about institutional grift into something much, much darker.
Right.
The author asks, is this just about profit, or is this ultimately about social control? So we have to introduce the most explosive claim in the source material. Dr. Sewell alleges that faculty at Ross had ties to eugenics organizations.
This represents a massive shift in the gravity of the narrative.
It really does.
The author is asking us to consider whether this school was not just a financially exploitative medical training ground, but an active platform for perpetuating racial and social hierarchies.
He actually uses a specific phrase that really stood out to me. He claims that in this system, quote, success is racialized.
Let's unpack the mechanics of how that would actually work, because it connects directly back to our first point.
Okay, let's do it.
If we accept the author's premise for a moment, that the faculty holds eugenicist or supremacist ideologies, how do they enforce that? They use the most correct doctrine. If a test has multiple factually correct answers, the one deemed most correct by the institution will naturally align with the cultural, linguistic, or socioeconomic cognitive patterns of the test designer.
So if a test maker has a specific cultural bias, they design a rubric where the logic required to arrive at the answer perfectly mirrors their own worldview.
Exactly.
And if a student thinks differently, maybe because they come from a different educational background, a different culture, or they are neurodivergent, even if they arrive at a scientifically valid answer like Talon, they fail.
Yes.
The subjective nature of what is most correct basically becomes an invisible cultural filter.
And when you view it through that lens, the standardized test is no longer just a financial sieve to cull the herd for profit. It becomes an ideological weapon.
Wow.
It is a way to filter out anyone who doesn't share the cultural and ideological framework of the institution's elite. Standardized tests have historically carried a very complex tension regarding class and race.
No, absolutely. They've often been used as gatekeeping tools.
The author is mapping that historical tension directly onto the modern operational model of a medical school. He is arguing that the multiple-choice exam is the modern mechanism of eugenics, quiet, administrative, and completely hidden behind the veneer of academic rigor.
To bring this back to your world as a listener, this transforms a story that you might initially brush off as just tough grading in med school into a deeply unsettling narrative about institutional gatekeeping. If the people designing these ambiguous tests hold discriminatory views, then the exam is a mechanism to enforce obedience to those views. You aren't just failing a biology test, you are being systemically filtered out of the upper echelons of society.
Now, at this stage in the narrative, a reasonable observer might think, well, this is terrible, but it's an offshore for-profit school. That's a structural anomaly.
Right. Surely that kind of ideological rot wouldn't happen at a top-tier nonprofit U.S. institution.
But Dr. Sewell's journey shatters that assumption entirely. He leaves Ross University and moves from the Caribbean back to the mainland.
He enters a Ph.D. program at Pepperdine University.
Yeah.
And as a reader, you completely understand why he makes this move. He is looking for a fresh start. He is moving from an offshore school known for massive attrition rates to an elite, highly respected mainland institution. You would naturally expect the atmosphere, the ideology, and the structural fairness to be night and day.
But instead of escaping the hierarchy, he claims he just found the exact same system cloaked in a new wardrobe.
Cloaked in academic prestige.
Exactly. The author details a specific, highly disturbing incident from his time in the Pepperdine Ph.D. program. He claims that a professor there openly declared their opposition to interracial relationships in an academic setting.
Okay, let's pause here because I have to push back on behalf of the listener.
Go for it.
How does a top-tier, highly visible mainland university have a professor allegedly making open statements against interracial relationships without massive immediate repercussions?
Sounds impossible.
Right. How does an institution like that maintain its stellar reputation and its funding while this is happening in its classrooms? It's like an exclusive country club. As long as the club pays its massive property taxes and keeps the front lawn perfectly manicured, the city inspectors never look inside the clubhouse to see how the members are actually behaving.
I would actually push back on the idea that it's just the city looking the other way. According to Sewell's thesis on elite institutions, it's not just immunity, it is active reinforcement.
Interesting.
The core mechanism protecting these schools is what he calls federal legitimacy. The government isn't just ignoring the clubhouse. They are the primary financial engine paying for the lawn care.
Okay, walk us through how federal legitimacy operates as a shield.
Well, established universities, the ones with the centuries of history and the pristine public images, are recognized and fully accredited by the state.
Right.
Because of that accreditation, they receive massive, steady, unquestioned streams of federal taxpayer funding, grants, subsidized loans, research endowments.
So that prestige and federal backing acts as an armor against weak accountability mechanisms.
Exactly. The author is pointing out a glaring structural double standard. An elite university can harbor faculty who promote overtly discriminatory ideologies, and the federal funding never blinks.
Because the institution has the stamp of federal legitimacy, the taxpayer money just keeps flowing, effectively validating the institution regardless of the toxic behavior within it.
Yes. The prestige essentially buys them permanent structural protection.
And this brings us to the ultimate fallout of this entire system, because having established how both offshore medical schools and elite mainland universities allegedly operate filtering for conformity and protecting their own, the author asks us to look at the people left behind.
To ones outside the system.
Right. What happens to the people who refuse to play the rigged game?
This is where Dr. Sewell introduces his own personal experience as an independent inventor. While he was navigating this academic landscape, he developed an invention of VT biosensor.
And a biosensor, just for context for the listener, is essentially a diagnostic tool that uses biological material like enzymes or antibodies to detect specific chemicals or disease markers in the body. It's a piece of hard applied science.
Exactly. So here he is, an independent innovator, working outside the protected walls of the elite institutions, trying to push a tangible technological advancement.
Right.
He attempts to get funding to scale this biosensor. He applies for grants from the National Science Foundation, the NSF, and seeks other government contracts.
And he faces outright rejection across the board.
Total rejection.
Here is the brutal contrast the text sets up. Pepperdine University, an institution where a professor allegedly opposes interracial relationships openly, continues to receive unquestioned federal funding and legitimacy.
Yeah.
But Dr. Sewell, an independent scientist trying to push a legitimate medical innovation, is completely starved of resources and shut out by the government.
If we synthesize all the mechanisms we've discussed today, from the rigged most correct exams that enforce cognitive conformity, to the financial attrition model subsidized by loans, to the ideological gatekeeping, and finally to the federal funding double standard, it leads to a profound conclusion.
What's the core takeaway?
This entire manifesto isn't really about a single bad grading policy or one biased professor. It's about a much larger, much more dangerous question: who gets to define knowledge?
Wow. Who holds the keys to the kingdom of science and medicine?
The system, as Dr. Sewell diagnoses it, is mathematically and culturally designed to heavily favor institutional conformity over actual merit, capability, or originality.
Yeah.
If you're inside the prestigious institution and you bow to the most correct doctrine, you are funded and protected. If you are outside of it, challenging the paradigm or thinking differently, you are starved of resources, no matter how viable your biosensor or your ideas might be.
And let's connect this right back to you, listening to us right now. Why should you care about the internal grading politics of Caribbean medical schools or the grant rejection letters of an independent scientist?
It affects everyone.
It does. You should care because your life literally depends on these systems operating fairly. We all rely on these institutions to certify the doctors who will diagnose our illnesses and perform surgery on our families. We rely on federal agencies to fund the scientific breakthroughs that will cure diseases and build our future. And if the author is right, if the funding and the medical certification only flow to those who obey the most correct doctrine rather than those who actually innovate, then society as a whole is suffering a massive invisible deficit of talent and technology.
We culturally view science as a pure meritocracy.
Yeah.
We want to believe the best, most effective idea always wins out.
Right.
But the author is arguing that the infrastructure of science, the universities, the testing boards, the federal grant agencies, has calcified into a cartel of conformity. They aren't filtering for genius, they're filtering for compliance.
We have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today. So let's summarize the journey we just took through Dr. Sewell's diagnostic piece.
Okay.
We started at the ground level in the Caribbean, looking at the weaponized, most correct exams that turn multiple choice testing into a financial attrition strategy, completely subsidized by your tax dollars.
Yeah.
We examine the explosive allegations of eugenics, exploring how subjective grading rubrics can act as an invisible cultural filter.
Hmm.
And then we scaled up, moving to the insulated, federally funded halls of elite mainland institutions like Pepperdine, where prestige allegedly acts as an active reinforcement for discriminatory ideologies, while independent innovators are locked out in the cold.
And as we wrap up, we must reiterate our disclaimer one final time.
Yes, absolutely.
The claims we discussed today, the mathematically rigged testing, the financial grift, the racialized gatekeeping, the institutional bias, these are the intense, unvarnished perspectives of the author, Dr. Melvin Sewell. We present them not as endorsed, verified facts, but to challenge how we view the massive academic and scientific infrastructure that surrounds and governs us.
It's about looking at the systems you trust through a completely different, highly critical lens. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that pushes this whole conversation into the future.
Oh, I like where this is going.
We've spent this entire time talking about human faculty members designing rigged exams and institutional boards protecting their own biases.
Right, but as artificial intelligence begins to take over the educational landscape, specifically in the grading and creation of standardized tests, we are facing a massive turning point.
Exactly. You have to ask yourself, will AI finally strip away this subjective institutional bias and return us to a true objective meritocracy? Or will these institutions simply use machine learning to permanently hardcode the most correct doctrine into the algorithms of the future, making the invisible cultural filter entirely automated and completely impossible to question?